Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars Rewatch video. This one is going to be for Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. So, one of the cool things about kind of going back to the original trilogy for the first time in a while, I had the exact same reaction going back to Episode 4 last time out, is that it's just like, how well these movies hold up, like, visually, on pretty much all accounts, and just how well they kind of fit. Like, even though there's such a difference in time between when the originals were made versus when the prequels were made and so on, it's still very clearly Star Wars. And with this movie especially, of course, it always comes down to the big moment, the I am your father scene, and how impactful it is. But it's not all there is to the movie. I think the opening sequence on Hoth is a pretty good action set piece with the walkers and the snowspeeders. It's unique, it's different. It's probably not the best action set piece in the franchise, but it's a really cool way to start off. And then after that, you kind of have the characters kind of go their separate ways. Luke has to go to Dagobah to meet Yoda, and then Han and Leia, Chewie, and so on, they're just trying to escape from the Empire in the aftermath of the Battle of Hoth. And so it's all about, basically what happens to them, the impact that it ends up having on Luke on his own safe, doing his training, but wanting to help them out. And it leads to that kind of big character kind of decision once we get there. But I do want to focus just on the I'm Your Father scene for a second, and just how, it's one of those ones where you look at it now and it perhaps maybe doesn't have the impact that you expect it to, just because you do really need to have that full context of like when this movie first came out. That is when it was the most mind-blowing thing of all time. Since then, like, we've had big reveals in other franchises and TV shows and stuff like that, and they've done it, similar styles and stuff like that. You can tell there's definitely been some inspiration based off, the storytelling here. But it still works because, the tease of, basically Vader is Anakin is kind of what you're, is the kind of takeaway. If you watch them in like episode order, straight away what the situation is, because in Episode 3, Anakin was named Darth Vader. You see him at the end of that movie become this Darth Vader. Whereas if you watched him in like chronological order, of course, you get this amazing reaction here of like Obi-Wan is clearly talking about like Vader and Anakin as if they're like different people. And then in the aftermath of all of this, it is like, why did you lie to me, like Obi-Wan, and so on. And it is a great reveal because it is super shocking, but there's also something somewhat fitting to it. If Vader's super strong in the Force, then of course that sort of helps to explain why Luke is so strong in the Force. But there's still so many questions that you actually have, and it's one of those ones where like this is where Episode 3 and all the clarification that it gives about how exactly these things panned out was actually, in my mind, like really needed to give context. So I've always been a fan of like, I think one of the better ways to watch these movies in terms of the order you watch them in is to do 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 6. That way you still get the impact of the I am your father scene, but then you immediately go back and get the origin story of Anakin and the full explanation, because now that the truth has come out, like this reveal is effectively Vader is Anakin, now you explore Anakin's path from here to here. So you have full context going into 6 for why Anakin can be redeemed, and the whole idea that like Padme says that as like her final words, that there's still good in him, which helps to explain more on why Luke also begins to feel that way. Setting up the big Episode 6 moment at the end, as we'll get to when we discuss Return of the Jedi in the next video. But it's impactful for sure, because the duel that happens here is the lightsaber duel. I'm really focusing in on these during this rewatch here. Is that like, look, the choreography is better than Obi-Wan Vader from Episode 4, but it's still not great. there's hints about what's to come, and you can definitely see where like Nick Gillard like took the prequel era lightsaber fighting and took it and based it more off a couple of the sequences here, like some of the quick kind of up down left right sort of blocks that they do here. There's only one or two sequences like that. Otherwise, like the actual choreography of this fight isn't that amazing. It's the fight is really, you know, moved on by the emotion of the situation, the fact that this is a trap. You know, like Yoda and Obi-Wan basically told him, you're walking into a trap. You want to save your friends, but you might get yourself killed trying to do that. This could be the end of everything. And so there's that fear factor there, because you know Luke hasn't completed the training. He's only done a certain amount, and he's not this amazing warrior that he's going to become in episode 6. So and Vader is incredibly powerful. So they do a good job of getting across the idea that just Vader is a step ahead of Luke in terms of power and skill at all times, and Vader's just in complete control of this situation. And it's only like at the final end, towards the end, like Luke makes his kind of comeback. He's like on the ground on the kind of the big platform bit at the end where the I'm Your Father scene takes place, that he makes his sort of comeback up off the ground and gets Vader's kind of lightsaber off to the side and kind of gives him a little blow on the shoulder. And that's when immediately Vader gets serious and just cuts Luke's hand off. That was probably one of the better sequences in terms of like, oh, there's some clever kind of skill with a lightsaber here, of just Luke is trying to hold on to the thing behind him, so he's one-handed with the lightsaber, and he doesn't have the strength against Vader, where like strength is his main thing, and he just maneuvers his lightsaber away and cuts his hand off like super easily. It was very much, it was very similar in a way in terms of like the approach, in terms of just pure outskilling your opponent. It's the same way that Count Dooku cut off Anakin's arm, and it would just be like, yeah, there's a gulf in class here, and both Anakin and Luke, of course, going into the next movie, greatly improve their skills going forward. So that was excellent, and it's an impactful scene because you can tell it hits Luke hard. He's, over the course of this movie, been trying to sort of fulfill the destiny that he's been told of just like, I'll try to be like my father, but now he finds out that his father fell to the dark side. The scene he saw in the cave on Dagobah, this is what it meant, that he could go down the same path as Vader. It was kind of telling him this story to a degree, that this is the Skywalker sort of legacy in a way. But it was, and I like how his decision is just that, like, I won't join you. He just fully is committed. He will not join them, and he takes that risk by just, you know, letting go and falling off Cloud City. And I always remember, like, almost just as much as the duel itself is the, you know, Luke hanging off the sort of wind vane thing on the bottom of Sky City, and that's when the Falcon, of course, finds him, and you know, ending the movie on such a sort of down note in a way, of just Luke defeated physically, but also sort of mentally in a way, kind of broken by this. Like, what way is he meant to interpret what he's just found out? And now the fact that like Yoda and Obi-Wan didn't tell him this, there's a little bit of a kind of loss of trust from his mentors, and how does he react going forward? And that's where we get the interesting Luke in episode 6 that we'll get to. And now Luke has a mechanical hand as well. So some very cool stuff. I suppose we're basically going in like almost reverse order of the movie here, but Yoda. This is the debut of Yoda, and it's very interesting to watch this movie given the current like hype around Star Wars, in that like The Mandalorian, the child, baby Yoda basically is the most exciting thing to happen to Star Wars in like so many years. And here's where we got the debut of that species, the character of Yoda, to where this hype in a way that we are currently experiencing comes from. And it's interesting because like you obviously get a very different Yoda than the Yoda in episode 3. He is much more sort of kind of thoughtful. Like you can tell he's very much reflected and grown since his exile, and reflected on, I suppose, the flaws of the Jedi Order when towards the end of the Clone Wars, their ultimate defeat, compared to now, and the kind of the wisdom is sort of back in a way, and he's cryptic. There's elements of the sort of playful Yoda that we saw in the prequels, like with the younglings in, say, Episode 2. But also a different Yoda now that he's sort of been a little bit more isolated and stuff like that. So it was fun to see him just messing with R2 and that sort of thing. And even the element of sort of creepiness that they have in there, just like, you will be, and so on. Just some of the way they have it phrased things is kind of darker in a way. Now, of course, like there's lots of little small kind of continuity things of like, the Clone Wars, it is canon that like Yoda went to Dagobah before, and he actually had R2 with him. R2 was the one who kind of brought him there, so like R2 should be familiar with Dagobah, but they kind of roughly explain a lot of stuff with the droids, but just memory was wiped of that and so on. But I like all those connective moments of just like, this is why Yoda sort of knew to go to Dagobah, because this is where he'd be trained by Qui-Gon to learn how to become one with the Force, which is what Obi-Wan did in the previous movie, Episode 4. And like it's not a lot of training, and I think that's the big thing here, is that like Yoda gives Luke more training than, of course, Luke gives Rey in Episode 8. But like the difference, of course, is that Luke goes into his fight and loses, very clearly loses, and wasn't good enough. Rey doesn't really get any training and still manages to sort of win her fight. And that's it's stuff like that which is where the sequel trilogy hasn't been the most well written thing. It's just been sort of well acted, some good visuals, but not having the core, character plot writing that they need to get everything right. That's been the weakness of the sequel trilogy, that they just haven't been able to capture, and they get it right here, because this defeat that Luke suffers makes you care about him all the more, because he doesn't just win at everything. His one big success in a way so far, in the two movies 4 and 5, has been the run on the Death Star, that him doing that. And that made sense because you had already established he is a good pilot. He wasn't a good lightsaber duelist just in Episode 4. He has used it a bit, so he knows what he's doing with the lightsaber because of the gap between 4 and 5, but he still isn't in any way as skilled as Vader Anakin, of course. So he loses. And I think it's stuff like that, just the logic of the situation with regards to characters' training, that they haven't been doing with Rey. And it's where they have a lot of work to do in Episode 9, with regards to just having Rey be the character who wins the day. And is it earned or not? Like, can you get behind Rey doing all of this when she hasn't had to like really struggle to get anywhere? And that like both Anakin and Luke had to suffer, that sort of Jedi trial of the flesh in a way, by like losing a big battle and then coming back from it stronger in a way. So that's where we're definitely missing some stuff with Rey. And like I still like the character, but like there's so much work to be done. I think one of the surprising moments watching this, in terms of a slight negative, would just be that like I thought it was a little silly, the scene where like Luke's just pretty much out in the middle of the open on Hoth, very start of the movie, on the Tauntaun, and he just is like caught in the middle of like open ground by the Wampa. It was just a bit silly, just the situation of like they didn't even make it overly clear that like he couldn't see around him that well. I thought they just could have shot that a little bit better to make it clear that like the situation he was in, it made sense how a creature that big sort of snuck up on him. Like, I get it's white all around, here's a monster that's basically all white, but like, come on, like I expected just a little bit more than that. It still leads to, of course, the cool moment of like, as he escapes from the Wampa, we see him sort of use the Force for the first time, just getting the lightsaber to his hand, cutting the Wampa's arm off, then that, of course, leading to him sort of being sort of nearly dying in the snow outside, and that's when he gets the vision of Obi-Wan. That was very well done. That moment, I just thought how they got there was a little weird. The other side of the movie, the Han, Leia, the escape from Hoth, eventually getting to Cloud City. Um, this is definitely the kind of, I suppose, like less interesting part of the movie, but I still like most of it. I think the moment where they just stop for a while on the asteroid and there's the worm, that's definitely a little bit like it's not the most memorable kind of part of the movie, but I was surprised at how invested I was just in the fact of like this actually is I'm actually all for this, just them being pursued relentlessly by the Empire here as they're trying to escape, and the whole idea of like the Falcon actually has a few issues over the course of this movie and they're not quite on top of it, and that's why they're constantly getting kind of caught up. And eventually it leading to, okay, we'll go to Cloud City, the introduction of Lando, his betrayal, and them being captured on Cloud City by kind of Vader and Boba Fett. That's why Luke gets the vision on the other side of the story that they're in danger and he needs to go. That was actually really good once we got there, and we actually got some real character development in terms of the relationship that's developing between Han and Leia, and 3PO actually being a pretty interesting player in all of this, Chewbacca being kind of focused on the kind of 3PO side of the story, as like the 3PO gets kind of wrecked and in this movie later on, and I just thought that was well done, of like actually setting up a few interesting kind of plot points of the Empire hiring bounty hunters to check multiple kind of sections of the galaxy. Boba Fett is the one who ends up kind of being in the same area. It's good setup for 6, with the idea of like this movie ends on a bad note, not just because of what happens to Luke, but also the fact that Han is frozen in carbonite and is being shipped off to Jabba the Hutt because of all that money that he's being owed. So there was a bounty out against him, and just as this relationship was about to happen, this is when it happens. So you really feel for Leia in all of this. You feel for Han. You feel for Chewie as well, like the emotion of him seeing what happens to Han. It's really, I think, well done. And that moment, of course, the classic, I love you, I know, is well done. And it's that sort of dynamic that I don't think we have quite yet between the sequel characters, in terms of like 7 I thought was actually quite good between Finn and Rey, but then just the way 8 played out, and like Rey just being completely off on her own, she didn't really interact with the other characters at all. Poe and Finn didn't even get to interact all that much, and then like Poe and Rey only met at the end of the last movie. So there's a lot of work that they need to do in 9 on that front as well, just really getting you behind these 3 as the main 3 characters. They just have to start from zero with a bunch of those dynamics almost. Versus here, like you care about all of them, and so going into 6 with all those plot points of just what will Han be like when he gets out? What is Leia going to do to get him out? Like Lando trying to redeem himself after sort of causing this, but ending up on the right side. Luke again trying to, really, become the Jedi Master and make up for his kind of failure in this movie. And another interesting thing about this movie is that, like, it's a movie that, apart from the battle on Hoth, doesn't really deal as such with the battle between the Empire and the Rebellion. That was the Hoth section at the very start. The rest of it is all character focused. In that, like, we don't cut in the middle of the movie to the Rebel Alliance versus the Empire here, or in space, or something like that. It's all just our group, character focused, not trying to do anything else. And I think that really worked, because those type of things, when it's just big faction versus big faction, if you don't have the time to really develop them that much, those battles can be very kind of lacking in emotion. But here, it worked because it wasn't like the entire resistance in episode 8. Apparently there's only a little bit left of the resistance, and they're being pursued in this really slow chase scene. Here instead it was just, no, they're pursuing the Falcon, and our main characters are all here pretty much. It definitely, I think, worked a bit better, in that it's a plot point in this movie that, like, maybe could have gone the way of some of those plot points in, like, The Last Jedi, but it didn't, because you got into it because of the good setup of the character dynamics in the stuff on Hoth, and then obviously building it even more once they're on Cloud City with Lando's betrayal and the friendship between Han and Lando, but then it's turned on its head here. But Lando does manage to turn things around at the end when he realizes that the Empire, he's not going to get a good deal out of the Empire, that they're just going to renege on the deal as well, and he does the right thing, and I think they do a good job at Lando just in between 5 and 6 in terms of filling in that role effectively, like having to fill that Han Solo role of they talk about, you're a great leader, Han, like we don't want to lose you, as he's kind of going off to pay Jabba for what he owes him and stuff like that. So just that little thing of they planned out those sort of situations of the Rebel Alliance is down an important member, but they sort of gain a new one here, so they're not super at a loss, but they're still a good requirement to get Han back. And in 6, I think they do a good job with Han at just getting across the idea that you see him leading that mission on Endor. It's well done. But yeah, I suppose the final thing to talk about is just Luke's decision to leave his training to go to Cloud City, and just the discussion that's had around it. It's very Aang in the Guru, if anyone's watched Avatar: The Last Airbender, and that you can very much tell Avatar was probably inspired to a degree by what happens here, of just your hero main character doing this training and them sensing that something's wrong with their friends and having to leave that training behind, and what does it mean, and so on. I thought they did a good job here just getting across the rashness of Luke, that he is still very young here, and because he's not so entrenched into the Jedi ways, he just kind of wants to learn the skills and maybe not the full attitude and approach. And you see in episode 6 he comes in and has that sort of patience that is required, and I think that is strong development for him across the movies, for sure. But it's understandable. It's one of those things where it has to happen. The hero has to have that kind of make the mistake, go off a bit overconfident, lose the battle, but come back stronger from it. And that's the classic storytelling of the originals, and just getting it all right. A lot of people will say that Empire is their favorite Star Wars movie. It's not mine. Like I said before, Revenge of the Sith is my favorite one, just because I like a little bit more complexity in the plots that are going on, and for me, Revenge of the Sith hits all of those notes in terms of a complex plot. The obviously lightsaber duels are better than we have here, and so on. It's just an era that appeals to be that little bit more than the original trilogy era, but I'm always impressed every time I go back to the originals and just remember that yeah, this is really good Star Wars. There's a reason I got into Star Wars in the first place, and it's because these originals were good, and then the prequels were what kind of really got me in as just a long-term fan in terms of this is the era of Star Wars that I like the most type thing. So yeah, that's my thoughts on Star Wars Episode 5, Empire Strikes Back. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on the movie. And yeah, next time we'll be moving on to Return of the Jedi, and then into the sequels as we build up. We're just weeks away from Rise of Skywalker. I'll do some sort of a final prediction video ahead of Rise of Skywalker, so be on the lookout for that. And of course, I'll have coverage of the movie when it actually does come out. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.